So good evening and welcome to the National Maritime Big Skills Debate here at the magnificent Old Royal Naval College, Maritime, Greenwich. My name is Peter Green, I'm Chief Exec of National Maritime and the Shipbuilder and Ship Repairers Association. The Big Skills Debate is part sponsored by Lloyd's Maritime Academy and the National Maritime Training Centre at Gravesend and is delivered in partnership with Jobs in Maritime, the Greenwich Maritime Centre and the Shipbuilding and Ship Repairers Association. I'd like to thank you all for your support. I'd now like to give this opportunity to our host this evening, Dr. Tim Aycott, Director of the Greenwich Maritime Centre, University of Greenwich. Tim.
Thanks very much. The Greenwich Maritime Centre was launched in March 2016, so we're a relatively young centre. It was set up in the University of Greenwich to be a cross-faculty centre that really tries to capture all the expertise from across the university, whether it be engineering, social science, maths, business, etc., and think about how that relates to maritime issues. So consequently, this big skills debate is incredibly relevant to the university and to the Greenwich Maritime Centre in particular.
This evening's debate aims to challenge, consider and explore how maritime training can best support business needs. Chaired by Andrew, we'll take 6 questions. So the format this evening is 6 questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Andrew Bell? Okay, thank you.
And I think we'll get straight into it, if that's all right. So we can start getting on with the purpose of why we're here, and that's to look at many of the issues that you obviously have invested so heavily in, that the panel obviously want to contribute to as well. So I think we have a question from Nick Harvey from Seafarers UK. Nick, shall I repeat that for the camera? That is, how do you define the maritime sector and what are the range of skills and educational needs within that sector? So maybe if we start, first of all, Ewan, I'm going to come to you, and if you'd like to contribute to that.
Certainly we've had a look, before coming to this debate at various definitions. So we've got the Institute of Marine Engineering, Science and Technology, long list of activity, which goes from, as you say, marine engineering, marine architecture, through to diving, but does also include the marine leisure industry as well.
Well, I would define the maritime as everything man-made, as opposed to marine, which is we would view as sort of nature and the general environment. And again, in our definition, we would have a very, very broad definition in the sense of it's everything above, on and underneath water. And in terms of the activities, clearly the naval sector is a subsector of maritime, and it's a very unique sector in the sense of it is generally high hazard, complex assets that require self-regulation and asset ownership. And with that comes a breadth of skills over the entire life cycle of an engineering product. And it can be everything from marketing skills all the way through to nuclear science and engineering.
One of the problems in Europe is no one wants to work in ports anymore. So it is coming to a stage where, because people don't want to work in ports anymore, you automate further and further, and therefore you actually don't have people who have that skill, so it's kind of a cyclic loop. So a key concern and an area that needs to be developed, and that will lead into other, obviously, areas, is skills, qualifications, training, fundamental in terms of not only engineering and IT, but also some of the other aspects that go with it, just normal logistics as well.
I think the complexity of how our maritime industry is set up, the complexity of how you can come in, which generates a lot of opportunity. There are many rungs on the ladder, but how that all comes together to then enable someone to see how a career progression can happen is the challenge. It's very easy in many industries to see how you can progress a career in that particular industry. In our industry, because of there's such a vast range of opportunity, it needs a subtly different approach in the way that we sell it to attract people to come to the industry. Because I think the biggest challenge for our industry is attracting people to come into it, because so few families and regions and communities are connected with the sea than perhaps the way they were many, many years ago.
I think that's definitely something we'll come on to as we go through this evening as well. Sessions.
If I may add as well, I think it is. I mean, the educational needs are all about school, so it's taking it back to primary level. It's engagement with schools, it's early interventions, it's actually an understanding for the maritime sector from a young age as well. I think that's what we lack in schools, and education for the sector, I think is key.
So if you look at all the different types of sectors, nuclear, aerospace, transport, the naval sector was the least popular in terms of mid-career movement from one sector into the naval sector. Tackling that are things like transition courses for people, but also we'll be launching next year some, largely for women, but return to work programs because we've lost a lot of skills and diversity. The other two areas that we've been investigating are things like upskilling, so moving from people that may have a real good grounding in mechanical engineering, but largely because ships are electrically powered now, we need more electrical skills. So how can you take, in a shorter period of time, a good mechanical engineer and give them a few modules which would allow them to practice in sort of electrical propulsion, for example. And that's been a particular gap that we've been looking at. And the other one is just basic updating, which is, we used to do a lot in the sector, particularly in defence, of mid-career updates, because the intelligent part of any workforce is generally the middle management, who are people who are young enough to understand the new technology, but experienced enough not to make poor judgments. And again, we've dropped off in the last few decades a lot of that mid-career updates, and that is coming back in a big way. And in particular, I think because people in the future are going to be working for 40, 50 years before they retire, there is an issue about how do you refresh, how do you sustain passion. And so those are the sort of three sectors, that sort of three issues that the naval sector have been struggling with.
I think maybe the direction where we're headed here leads into the next question. So that's the barriers and opportunities for growing employment within the maritime sector, and then the significant differences in the needs of all the various employers. I think we've got a lot of employers represented here, and there'll be some very different needs. So maybe James, if you could start us off, that'd be great.
A barrier for us is the length of time it takes to train a new boatmaster to operate on these waters with all the various endorsements that they need. It can take, it's kind of 4 or 5 years in the making, and if we want to be a commercial and reactive, adaptive business, we need to plan that far ahead. So it's about the skilled labour, predominantly boat masters and handlers, but further than that, engineers. There's a skills gap in the engineering sector in the UK. So what we try and do with that is train and grow our own. So they don't tend to exist. If we need to recruit somebody, you can't. It's really difficult to buy in the level of skill and qualification that you need when you need it. They don't exist. So what we've done is try to adapt to grow your own policy. So we're using internal succession, using apprentices, planning 5 years, up to 5 years out to say when we're going to need this injection of skilled labour, and ring-fence the investment in that, because you take people on and onboard them today, you might not be using them operationally for years to come. So we've made a decision, and it's not always an easy one because it can be quite a big number, but we've made a decision to ring-fence that investment for the future-proofing and growth of the business.
One of the challenges we face is that other industries, to be pretty blunt, are poaching staff from, so I can imagine yourself, you train all these people up and other people go along and offer lots of cash, which is not something we can afford, and they can offer something more attractive, and the maritime industry still for some people is not seen as sexy enough to work in. So people are more prepared to go work in a nice robotic warehouse somewhere that gives you products the next day when you order online, or something like that. That is a challenge, is once you invest a lot of money in training these people, they can disappear quite quickly. So retention is very hard, and we have lots of schemes in place now, particularly and what was touched on, electrical engineers are very precious these days with all the automation, PLCs and all the way it's gone. You know, the engineering has moved from all greasing and all sorts of stuff to more electronic and electrical aspects, and that is a very significant shortage in the industry, and retaining them is quite difficult.
But I think because of the diverse range of skills that are involved in the maritime sector that create the jobs, I mean, I've made some notes here, but I guess I echo everything that the panel says, because it is a lack of skilled workforce. It's a lack of education for the sector from a young age, from school age again. So we're coming back to that early engagement and intervention, which, if it doesn't exist on the curriculum, it has a knock-on effect for employers in the future. So it's something that does need to be considered. Technology has a lot to play with it as well. We are in demand of a more highly skilled workforce today. And all of the above are common hurdles that I face on a daily basis as an agency as well. So it's so diverse. It's the staggered pay rates, it's the lack of investment, it's the wanting to deliver things there and then. So they need skilled people. They can't afford to take the time out to train people.
There's a supply crisis, and it sounds like that's across the piece. So as a training organisation, what we're interested in is understanding what the individual sectors want from the students that go through our books. So we have 10,000 students a year go through. We're training them from year 6 through to officers of the watch, and what we're interested in is knowing what the industry wants from us as a training provider.
It's interesting if you go back, because I come from a Royal Naval background, and if you go into some of the city halls in the United Kingdom like Leeds or Birmingham, you'll find plaques of ships up there where the cities sponsored warships in the Second World War. And whilst they may be as far from the sea as you can get in England or the UK, they still have a connection with the maritime, but that just needs to be re-engaged, and that is something, I think, from a government intervention point of view, that something can be done to remind us that we're a maritime nation. I think in the maritime industry we talk about it a lot, but I wonder if people outside the maritime industry, A, are interested, and B, whether that connection is made as strong as it could be. And I totally agree that primary schools and that level is the place that needs to be aimed at. But I think the second point, really, Andrew, the opportunities that you describe, I think we've got to actually take a little bit of balance here. For my area where I work principally at the moment is in seafarers, and that is people that essentially are getting a degree without a debt. And if you were to say that to a doctor who's, let's take a GP, their training period would probably be about the same as a relatively senior officer, chief officer in the Merchant Navy. The fact that education is free and theirs is not, they may have a gripe with. So I think the notion that there aren't great opportunities out there is perhaps wrong. I think the challenge is the complexity of it. And I think sometimes we've jumped, a lot of the maritime colleges in the UK have jumped quite rightly because of funding issues onto the bandwagon of let's get more academic. And parents want to see their children aspiring towards degrees. That's very true. But the reality is they don't need a degree at that stage. When they need a degree is when they're probably going to transition and come ashore, and they're going to look at other opportunities, and that's really where they need that higher level qualification. Actually getting to sea, there is an academic component to it, and I wouldn't for a moment suggest there isn't. From an engineering perspective or a deck officer or an electrical perspective, there is a significant academic input.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And we'll move on with, I think, Michael McKenna. You're there. You have a question for us.
There's a quite widely publicised engineering campaign running. 9% is not enough in terms of gender diversity, and we don't have a centralised body to measure that. You know, I will base ourselves on our own demographics and want to do better for the business. But as an industry, we don't have any kind of centralised body to measure any of that, so we don't know how bad the problem is and what we want to do about it.
And also, as projects have got bigger and they now take longer, many decades, I mean, the aircraft carrier has been going as a project for 17 years already. So again, very few people have a full understanding of the whole life cycle of an engineering product. So one way that the UK Nest is trying to address that is looking at secondments. So a number of our companies are now allowing people to move, young engineers to move around. It gives them a professional network as but it gets them to understand the broader enterprise and the skills and the life cycle across the piece, and we're viewing that currently as a big success.
Do we think that current funding meets the needs of those in the sector? And probably more importantly, do we think that it's fairly and evenly distributed?
I think similar to James, we've had to basically fund as an employer our own training programs. So there is no help from industry-wide to train our people. So we've taken a similar approach. If we don't put the money in ourselves and train our own people, then the business will suffer. So we do have an apprenticeship scheme. There is an apprenticeship levy, so that is of help, and we do use that. But I think a lot more could be done industry-wide as well. But employers, and we don't have any particular issue with that, are having to fund it themselves to make sure your business is secured.
I think we are sort of a niche player in this because we're the transition often in terms of HE. If we're not doing marine engineering, which is one end, often we're taking people. But unless you get sponsorship, and we take people from across the globe, they're usually, it's the government, central government that says you need promotion within your maritime organisation. We will fund you for 1 year and you get promotion on the back of that. I can't remember the last time we had somebody from this country, I think it's 9 years ago, who was funded centrally. That's not, and that's just the way it is. I mean, we've had people from Japan, Singapore, Ghana, Nigeria, and so I think it's 10 years since we've had somebody from UK who's going on that sort of track. Now, that might be because they don't like our programme, but it's also, I think, because they would have to fund it themselves.
I hear from people on a daily basis wanting to get into the sector. Is there any funding available? How do I do my STCW course? I'm trying to enter the sector. It needs working on.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, sustainability is probably more than environment. Obviously, environment is key, but for sustainability for our business is working with the local community, working with the people who are the future of people who are primary schools, training up their skills, working with them. So I think we should all be spending more time with the local communities, local schools, etc., getting them interested and getting them testing their skills or improving their skills, and where the foresight is potentially what opportunities exist for them. I think that is a key part too.
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the things is to have events like this, but actually not just the panel thing, but actually talking. I know that sounds very easy, but actually saying, well, my colleague just said, saying to people, which we are trying to do, not this is what we can do, what do you want, what do you need, and how can we make it relevant, given that we have cycles within academia, which we have our own little world that we dance around in, but how can we be nimble enough within the regs to keep relevant so that you get those skills back in, and does that cost? Yes, eventually somebody's going to have to pay for it, but the actual conversation doesn't. And actually, if you start to make those links, other people start to look more favourably. If you're talking just another academic institution, they just think, well, that's university talking. If it's talking to industry, that tends to bring much more resonance in Whitehall and other places where you might get funding than if you're just talking one academic institution to another. So actually, it's having those initial conversations and actually asking the question. Not here we have, what do you need, can we deliver that, and where do you want it delivered? That's the other thing, because usually these are great buildings, but actually it might be better to come and train your staff on site.
10 years ago, there were a lot of international maritime organisations in London, and 10 years ago they were pretty much sitting in their silos, not collaborating in terms of what they do. I think we're in a far better place now than we were 10 years ago. I think post the Mount Evans report and set up of Maritime UK, we've now got an umbrella organisation that doesn't have a great staff to it, but it can pick up on the issues that we are generating as individual organisations.
So I think it needs to be employer-led, the changes, the collaboration. I think bigger businesses especially need to really lead the way without any funding in working with organisations like the Thames Skills Academy has been set up to provide training and skills and education in the waterways in the Port of London. And I think that organisations like that are great to bring people together for collaboration. That is largely employer-led. But the skills gap outside of the inland waterways, the skills gap exists in the industry. I think everybody has said that they're struggling to recruit people with the right skills when you need them. So outside of the inland waterways section, what can we do? You know, do we join up as an industry? Can we promote the industry better?
We've kind of taken working with our competitors and also our suppliers. I think one of the challenges when we talk about skill gaps, one of the challenges in the port industry is the port industry in handling cargo. The automation has gone, the advancement has gone ahead so fast. There's even a lack of skills in the suppliers of the people who supply the equipment. So we have these fantastic robotic cranes or whatever, but there's a few experts in these companies who have to service the whole of the world. And so one of the things that we've done, and as a port industry, from an engineering and IT perspective, we would actually talk with some of our colleagues in our competitor companies. Okay, commercially it's a separate issue, but we would talk to them about the challenges they have, the challenges we have, some of the skill issues they have, and try and share that wealth of knowledge between them, and maybe some of the experiences they've learned on how you can fix it.
One is where we've started to look at the Royal Navy and the loss of operator skills, making it far easier for them to transition into second careers in the sector. So the whole naval enterprise has been working on how do we keep people within the sector and not lose those skills. And another example has been the movement of procurement from pure competition into more collaborative type arrangements. So the Aircraft Carrier Alliance brought together companies that had never worked together, were actually brutal competitors at the time. But those companies, I think, have seen the benefits of collaborative working in terms of de-risking, but also that the workforce have the soft skills then to actually collaborate. And the Sub-Alliance on the carrier is another good example where we brought Rolls-Royce, L3, a number of companies involved in propulsion. And though those companies are able to offer propulsion solutions globally, because they can offer a solution, because they've learnt not just about packaging the technology, but also how do you work with people and organisations to create benefits. And I think there is activity and that allows people to learn success and trust and the benefits of collaboration.
Our thanks once again to you all for participating in the debate. Thanks to our sponsors, Lloyd's Maritime Academy, for the registration, and for the National Maritime Training Centre at Gravesend, who will be sponsoring our drinks reception right now, and of course our host, the Greenwich Maritime Centre. Tim, thank you. I now invite you all to join us for drinks, sponsored by National Maritime Training Centre. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think an event like this, specifically getting the whole industry together, and we had a large audience of 60 members, I think showing that we can collaborate, that there's a collegiality, that it's not poaching people from one sector to another, but actually to move the industry forward, to raise its profile, to increase funding, increase recruitment. This is essential.
So this is these kind of events where there's a really good conversation going on between industry and academia is really important to us. Hence, we were very pleased to help support National Maritime in developing this event.
Yeah, so it's talking about skills and the skills that are needed for now, the skills that are needed in the future, sustainability and growing those skills. So we're talking about collaboration of how these employers and industry can work together to help promote the industry and the skills that are needed.
Well, I think one of the messages tonight was collaboration. It's terribly important that we talk. I think one of the problems in the marine industry, maritime industry, in the past has been we've been rather siloed in the specific organisations we've got. So more of these opportunities to discuss things and more times we have to actually confer and agree on things that would help the industry move forward.
Collaboration is very important in our industry, I think looking at all the publications, looking at things like the Maritime Growth Study, the recommendations that have come out of that, we are all singing off the same hymn sheet, but it's about delivering those recommendations.
When we get together, we see opportunities, we see new ideas around where we can collaborate, we get inspiration. Certainly I've been inspired by many of the other speakers today.
Key takeaway for tonight for me, and what the message is, that in the new generation of container ports, there is a lot of automation, a lot of engineering, IT skills which are not in the market at the moment, and we need to develop those skills to enable businesses such as myself to succeed.